Welcome to the Integral Stage Sexuality Series. I'm Layman Pascal, and before I host my high-priced week-long workshop on integrative sexuality at a seaside Caribbean resort, I need to make sure I've been fully exposed to the multidimensional richness and profundity of this topic. A topic that most people find deeply physically compelling, emotionally significant, and for some people intellectually fascinating and brimming with spiritual and developmental potential. Here to share the ins and outs of their understanding is... Hello, everybody, and even if you don't have a body, because who knows, maybe the spirits are my core audience. Anyway, welcome back to the Integral Stage. I'm your addictively convivial and ludicrously loquacious host, Layman Pascal, and my co-conspirator today is evolutionary corporate personal and relationship trainer Jason the McClain, whose brain I will attempt to drain again. I think Jason is here today to talk about tools that accelerate self-development beyond the irrational, emotional, and social patterns in which we're embedded, and about insights that help relationships accommodate the unfolding needs of people operating at different degrees and styles of autonomy, clarity, sensitivity, and resilience, and maybe about how those things can help or hinder each other. Hi, Jason.
Hi, Layman. Mr. Pascal.
First question, Jason, what the fuck's wrong with people? I mean, what's
so many things.
Yeah, what's evolutionary public enemy number one? What's the most pernicious, widespread limitation on evolving human beings that might actually be a solvable phenomenon?
It's a great question. I'm going to say projecting and attempting to force our values onto other people. Without trying to understand the benefit of theirs and where they're coming from. And it doesn't matter, which context. So, labeling the other person is wrong because they have a different way of approaching the world. I think that would be the primary thing. It's also the essence of politics. So, it's one of the primary reasons I unplug from it, because the nature of politics, regardless of how well you think politics is going or not, the nature of it is, let me try to force my values on everybody, because if you win a vote, that's what you're doing. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, do certain things in the collective, because I think when we do have to move from me against the world to me and my people against the world to we're all in this together. And if we actually had more of we're all in this together, how can we make this actually work, in the commons? Would be a lot better off as a nation, as a country, as a community, and even in couplehood. Like there needs to be that kind of perspective. The unfortunate thing is so few people can occupy all those perspectives and give them enough value while still having the agency to move forward on certain things. It's kind of like herding cats at times. So I get the difficulty of it. But
what would you say is the main, just in general, what's the main effective strategy for overcoming that kind of values neglect and value projection?
Yeah, well, the practice and the evidence of personal evolution. Let's just talk about evolution along the self-developmental line, which is I've been an evolutionary guy since 2004, and that's been my primary focus: is how do we evolve along the self-developmental line, and then hopefully as within, so without, as above, so below, etc. But you can't help other people. Like, what we can do is take responsibility for our own evolution. But the practice and the evidence of it is the ever increasing capacity to take on an ever increasing number of perspectives. A lot of people think you then have to agree with them. You don't, but you have to understand. And understanding and agreement are very different. And, having the facility to be able to say, well, I understand where you're coming from, and here's what your primary concerns are. I get that. And to actually explain it to the person, they go, yeah, you do understand. And say, and there's this other piece that, you might want to include in your perspective. And so, first you have to be cleaned down enough to not get triggered by somebody having a different perspective or going, oh my gosh, they must be stopped. If we extrapolate out to the world, it won't work, like whatever it is, whatever people's ultimate concern is. And I do think we're seeing there's a lot of divides people talk about. Wealth, a wealth gap, or there's technology literacy gaps. I'm more concerned with the cognitive divide and the personal development divide, because if you're developed enough, you can adjust and be flexible to lots of changing circumstances. If you're not, you're gonna dig in, and like if you haven't yet gained enough facility, you're still stuck in that stage one, me against the world, or tribal, me and my people against the world. You're not going to have a very good time in the modern age, and certainly not in a major metropolitan area. I actually think cities don't get enough credit for essentially forcing people to deal with lots of different, and this has been the case for hundreds of years. Ports of call, like like traditional ports of call, generally they're more embracing of difference, because they've seen different people from all over the world coming in on ships trading things, and so you had to go, oh, this person doesn't look like me, or this person's different than me. And so you see people, they feel like they can be themselves more in major metropolitan areas, I think. And I think that's a very good thing. I mean, there's even environmental benefits to cities, because they produce less, per capita and per square kilometer or mile, they produce less harmful pollution, just because of the waste disposal system. There's no burning days in the city, so there's lots of benefits to cities, and they're more efficient, and but I think one of them that is overlooked is that it forces people to at least engage with difference and potentially accept it. Not that there aren't racists and xenophobes in cities. I'm sure there are. But.
So the first thing is we need to be able to not be triggered. We have to have some kind of ease or gap or space in which to see these things without immediately flying off the handle and extrapolating it to a catastrophic infinity. Then we have to have some kind of better encounter with it, hopefully leading to the point where we can make some richer inner map of what the validity of their values are. And that's much more likely to happen if we're in contact with more different kinds of people.
Yeah, it's one way of doing it. I also think that people need to, like, rather than saying there's a wonderful book by Ray Diala called Principles, which it's my current favorite book. But one of the things that has people be successful in the world in any endeavor, an exchange with a checkout person, or with their finances, or in their relationship, or in business, is to take responsibility. Like, what can I do differently? How could I improve the situation? How can I, right? So that's, you're not going to, blame is right. You're right next to victimhood. And sometimes people truly are victims, but if you stay in that mindset, you're not going to actually improve anything. You'll get comfort, support, love, which is what makes it so seductive. But first you have to just take responsibility that they are your triggers. Like, you are triggered. You're not being triggered by somebody. You get triggered. But we can clean that stuff out. And that's why even when I've guided coaches or holistic practitioners to building their business, which is something I'm not doing anymore, but I did for a while, from like 2008 to, I just did another course because of the NLP practitioners I'm training. I just, gave them one weekend on how to, my contention with a lot of training organizations is they give people these skills, but they don't teach them how to actually have it be effective as a profession. But we can remove these triggers from ourselves, or the triggers can be removed. And unfortunately, because bypass is such a common occurrence sometimes because people don't want to feel. Sometimes very effective tools at removing imprints from our nervous system somatically, without actual somatic practices, which are much longer and can actually re-trigger traumas and stuff. But using advanced mental technologies, we can clean that stuff out so you're just no longer triggered by that thing. And I think that a lot of practitioners lately are doing people a disservice. And I don't think it's because part of it is they don't think it's possible. And this is the overcorrection from bypass is, well, no, it's not. You can't remove your triggers. You can just, deal with them better. Or no, we can actually remove them. Like, I used to be a bundle of triggers in my late 20s, totally, mid to late 20s, like triggered all the time about all sorts of things. And, triggers could be anger or fear but you're really triggered when you can't actually hear the person anymore. Like your neurology shuts down because it's firing off a whole gestalt of events from the past. It's not the thing that's happening right now. So even when I'm working with somebody who's building their business, the first thing we do is, remove fear, anxiety, shame from their nervous system, anger, if it's there. And so it's certainly, in the past when I worked with people with health issues, which I don't anymore, but when I did, first thing we do is we get rid of, shame and anger. And, fear is helpful too, but especially anger with debilitating conditions. So that's always phase one. And then we actually have more choice. And then we can build facility with ourselves. Navigating our interiors is a physical skill. And I think, one of the things I love to say over and over again is that, everything is hypnosis. Like songs you listen to, thoughts you have, conversations you're in, books you read, shows you watch, it's all hypnosis. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a trance, right? But just choose your trances consciously. But to do that, you have to reach a level of facility. And communication skills are also physical skills. And sometimes that's communicating with yourself. Sometimes it's communicating with others. So if you're not actively engaged first of all, you need to give yourself grace there. Like, it's a physical skill. So you're going to metaphorically scrape a knee or two. You're going to fall down. It's going to feel awkward at first. And then pretty soon, you start to feel like you can, it's like, I love lifting weights metaphor. Like you're sore at first, or sometimes, maybe the weights feel awkward, but then actually you start to feel competent with it. And then you start to add weight, you start to take on, new challenges. And I think it's a good metaphor for personal development as well.
I want to come back to questions around trance and related psychotechnologies, but first I'm curious because it looks to me like you're at times actively trying to remember to make these things sound simplified and generalized.
Totally.
And maybe you
you
could
kidding me?
Maybe you can tell us a bit about your journey to bring complex, big picture developmental philosophy into colloquial terms and practical insights. Why try to make yourself sound dumb, and has it worked?
I may not be very smart, but I know what love is, Jenny.
That's pretty good.
It's been a while, but since I've seen the source material for that. Forrest Gump for you young people. Well, I hope I don't sound dumb. I hope I sound.
I just mean simplified and colloquial and generalized.
Yeah.
Like, when did you first start to think
I
that
love
was
the way
important?
I love the way you phrased it. Well, it's important to some degree because we need to make complex concepts accessible to people. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to access them. So, I was in prison at the age of 19. I'm 51, or I'm about to turn 51. And I was in prison for my third felony right before the 3 strikes law in California. This is 1990, I don't know, 1-ish. I'm fuzzy on dates, but it was over 30 years ago. I used to steal brand new sports cars off car lots for entertainment. They had lock boxes on the windows, and lazy salespeople would leave them the keys in the lock boxes at night. And I would, endeavored to teach them a lesson about security. And I wasn't doing anything with the cars except for drive. They were sports cars. I would drive them for a couple of weeks and leave them. Anyway, so I ended up in prison at the age of 19 or 20 for a short period of time. And, I had a horrifically, what a lot of people would call a horrifically traumatic childhood. I didn't consider it that. It was just my childhood. And my father was a martial artist. He was a black belt in Hung Gar Tiger Crane. Kung Fu, which is, so made the beatings interesting. But I hadn't seen him since I was 15, and I was reunited with my mother. My mother left my father when I was 5 or 6, taking me and my sister with her, because, he hit her like, one too many times. She finally was like, no, I'm getting me and my children out of this. But he came down and he kidnapped me and my sister back and then filed for divorce. And they were technically his children too, and the car was technically in his name too. So the police were like, "Yeah, we can't do anything." First of all, he crossed the state line. Second of all, there's no custody violation here, right? So I was raised in his environment. But when I got to prison, I had been reunited with my mother at 15, and I didn't really know what to do with it. And of course I was, horribly, not only was I a massive introvert and still am, like it takes me a lot to actually, people think that's weird. I don't have any social anxiety, but I really like being alone. And I don't, I don't find most of the world a hospitable environment for somebody with a nuanced consciousness. So somebody doing life handed me a book called Awaken the Giant Within by Tony Robbins. And that sort of started my healing path. And then I got certified as an NLP practitioner in 1995, because I only spent 2.5 years, 3 years in prison. So, I was very fortunate. The three strikes law passed while I was in there. And for anybody who doesn't know what the three strikes law was at the time, if you had 3 felonies, didn't matter which 3, by the way, it could have been drunk driving. You were sentenced to 25 to life. So I missed 25 to life by like 9 months or something. And so I was very fortunate. And I was very fortunate to, frankly, I think it would have been better if I had gone to prison sooner, except I wouldn't have met Tim, who gave me this book. And then I got out, I got certified as an NLP practitioner and then a master practitioner in NLP, neuro-linguistic programming. And, back then it meant something. Like you'd spent 8 months and you were, rigorously observed. And part of my certificate said that, it says that you demonstrated respect for the ecology of the being. That was part of the certification. So, NLP comprehensive, the Jedi side of NLP, not the Sith side, as I like to say. And then pretty shortly after that, I got introduced to integral theory. And I read Sex, Psychology, and Spirituality, Ken Wilber's book at the ripe old age of 26 or 27. And while NLP had me feel like Neo, navigating my own experience or reality, Sex, Psychology, and Spirituality and the integral model had me feel like the world had order and a framework, a map. The map is not the territory, but I had a map in which everything fit. And there's a lot of books that I feel have changed my life, but that one changed my life, and it's required reading for my NLP, which I'm also no longer doing, but it's required, and we're completing. Well, I don't know when this will air, but it's October 28th now. We're completing. It's 7 months long, and we complete in 2 weeks. But I don't think you can operate as a practitioner without understanding stage conceptions. So, for me, I know that you asked me when did I feel like I needed to sound dumb. I have a sort of middle road about it. I got a lot of feedback early on. People are, this is maybe 2004, 2005. And I said, your website's too heady, too intellectual, and I said, good. I don't want any dumb clients. I want people who are already developed, like they've already done some personal development. I should not be your first personal development experience. or, I recommend something gentler. But also, it was a filter. But still, the things that matter to people are, income, emotions, relationships, sex, and I resisted that for a long time. And I built a very successful practice around accelerating personal evolution. And a good friend of mine who he's since died of pancreatic cancer, but he said, Jason, and we actually went to our NLP practitioner training together. He was, 10 years my senior, 20 years my senior. Really brilliant guy. His branding was the street smart CEO. Invented medical devices. He was just an overall genius. But he called me up when I released my personal evolution package, a 6-month package. And he goes, Jason, you got to sell people what they want, not what they need. I said, yeah, but this thing solves all the problems. It solves the, I've since gone the middle road of the work is very deep and people can tell it's deep and it comes from a framework, but also the marketing copy I use for individual things try to speak directly into people's experience, because we all have very similar experiences. We've all felt certain things. We've all wanted certain things. We all fear certain things. Well, most people fear certain things. There's commonalities. So it's really about trying to create this common and connected human experience while also, not indulging in it.
One of the main tools you seem to be bringing into this is your evolutionary NLP. And maybe you could give people who don't know a general sense of what neuro-linguistic programming deals with, and also what distinction you're trying to make by adding the term evolutionary to that.
Yeah. By the way, one of my pet peeves right now is people just using evolutionary. Don't know any fucking thing about stage conceptions, or it's really grinding my gears. It's just become it's important to me. Terms should mean something and they should be accurate. Evolutionary literally means, moving through stages, evolving through stages. And, each stage arises out of the limitations and hopefully handles the limitations of the stage previous. So there's this ever expanding embrace of the world and, ever increasing number of perspectives and all that. So, I think people who just say evolutionary because it's the cool thing to say is kind of a pet peeve out there for me right now. I saw somebody do it, they're 35 and of course they're in love. So of course they're doing some sort of relationship coaching because that's what unethical relationship coaches do. They see it as a marketing opportunity, not as an actual thing to serve people. So that's what the evolutionary is. And as applied to the work of accelerating personal evolution is about resolving the thing at the stage that's stopping them from moving up. And NLP is the most effective tool I've found to do that. I've studied lots of tools and modalities and everything from Vipassana meditation to, Chinese acupressure to, and it's funny, a lot of people are like, hey, have you heard of EMDR? I'm like, yeah, it's just NLP, eye accessing cues. It's not a big deal. We don't need lights. That's sort of lazy. Here, just follow my fingers. And different, because you're accessing different aspects of your neurology when your eyes move in certain directions. And it's pretty hardwired throughout the world. I think there is a community, I want to say in the Caucasus Mountains, where it's flipped, it's reversed, but virtually all of humanity has the same neurological makeup in that way. When you look up, you're visualizing. When you're, if you're looking down, you're feeling. It's, and there's 6 points that they talk about. But anyway, that's sort of a pet peeve of mine. But what NLP is the study of the structure of your subjective experience. And a lot of people don't think your experience has structure, but it does. And once you understand that structure, then you can navigate it with incredible facility. Most people just a thing happens and they feel a certain way and they just think that that's it. And they might have choice about how quickly they move through, but they don't actually understand that there is a structure taking place or a structure it's working within. And to give people a real experience of this, one of the exercises I like to do when I'm introducing them to this concept is, imagine a face. And for those listening, just imagine a face of somebody who you feel very fond for, like you would like to see them again soon. And as you close your eyes and you just notice where that face appears around you, as a hologram or an apparition or whatever, just notice the location, the distance, like that, qualities of it. And then go ahead and let that fade. And then bring up the face of a person who you would rather not see again. Maybe you'd cross the street, if not, not strong negative feelings, but you'd kind of like to, you'd be like, oh gosh, that person, I hope they don't see me. I don't really want to talk to them. Maybe it's a coworker that you never quite gets when you want to enter a conversation. Maybe it's somebody who, whatever. It's so hard for me to come up with negative because I just avoid those people. But notice that face is in a different location around you. And if you move that face closer to you, you're going to feel some sort of physical somatic reaction. Then, put it back where it belongs. That's the simplest, easiest, most accessible way I can demonstrate what NLP is. And so just imagine being a master at being able to navigate your own internal experience. Of course, we mentioned bypass in the beginning. It's critical to make sure that we're not doing it to make sure that we don't feel things we need to feel, because it will atrophy our capacity to feel them. So, I learned this the hard way. I used to just not feel anything negative in my 20s and, after my divorce, which was, very brutal, really. I was in such grief, and I had not felt feelings like that for a decade. And so it crippled me. Like I was not functional for 6 months at least, maybe, some could argue much longer, but like literally not functional, like walk around the city in the middle of the night, kind of not functional, just going, what's happened to me? What just happened? So we want to make sure that we, and one of my mentors after I left my wife, one of my mentors, I went to assist one of his trainings, and he's the guy that developed the grief resolution ceremony, the NLP grief resolution ceremony, Dr. Robert McDonald. And I was just sort of, you ever been crying, like it's just sort of leaking? You're not like sobbing or anything, but it's just like you can't really stop. Your eyes are just leaking constantly. So I was supposed to be an assistant. I was in the back of the room, leak weeping. I don't know, whatever. Doing that thing, just like can't really stop crying, not really sobbing. And he goes, and he wanted to demonstrate the grief process. And he says, is there anybody here experiencing grief? Now, he and I had been in daily communication about what was going on in my life. So I raised my hand, my cap was down because I was just. And he goes, oh, what happened? I go, well, I left my wife. How long has it been? 3 months? Not long enough. Anyone else have I was like, what the fuck? Like, you could take this pain away from me. And that taught me a very important lesson, and as I look back, and it took me, how those faces I just moved around, one of the things that I couldn't do was move my ex-wife's face. It was like, it would snap back. And after, some communication with my unconscious parts, I realized that it wasn't going to let me move it until I learned all the lessons I needed to learn. So I didn't make them again from my marriage and divorce. And there's a lot of lessons I learned. In fact, some of the seeds of the evolutionary relationship material were born there. Like, what questions didn't I ask that I should have asked on the first date or second date? What didn't I know that I should have known before getting married to somebody? Why did I, like we had incredible chemistry. We had such great chemistry. She called me a year ago after her second divorce. 20 years later. And so, the lessons learned from that are important. And that's really, I have it that relationships, I resisted getting involved in the relationship context for so long professionally, really until about 3 or 4 years ago when I started to develop some of this material, or codify some of the material, like, start to actually say, well, actually I've been working on this material for a while. I just didn't want the responsibility of, giving somebody, here's the thing, when you give somebody advice, you're like, here's how you can communicate that thing to get the result you want. And then they don't communicate it in the way that it should be communicated. And then, they have some sort of breakdown. Sometimes they do. It depends on how developed they are or how clear they are of their triggers. But mostly I didn't want the responsibility. But that's not how much crap, like low level crap, is out there around relationships. But I thought, well, somebody's got to, provide something better, deeper. And as a romantic, I want people to have deep, connected, intimate relationships. And this fear of intimacy, I think, might be one of the biggest fears people have. I read a book on phobias 20 years ago. And it said in America, the top 3 phobias are spiders, number 3. Number 2 is death. The number 1 fear apparently was public speaking. So most people fear public speaking and they fear death, which I think is funny. I have it that they should have added a question to it about, what if somebody knew everything about you? Or what if you were like something about intimacy? Because I think more people fear intimacy than anything else, like if being truly connected to somebody. And things like eye gazing parties and, some entry level stuff like that, which is fine, but it's not, really intimacy, gazing in someone's eyes or cuddling with somebody. It's like, to me, it's like, hey, what if I'm so comfortable with myself? And I think that's where it starts. A lot of people just aren't comfortable with themselves. And so if they're worried, I just saw an ad. One of the unfortunate parts about watching my football news programs on Peacock is occasionally there's a commercial that comes up. And if watching it live, I can't skip through it. I can if I watch the replay, but there's some new show. I think it's called Love Stories or Love something. And this guy, very attractive African-American dude, he's like, I want to tell her everything, but I'm afraid it'll all fall apart if I tell her the truth about myself. And I'm like, what the fuck, And it's enough in our collective consciousness, apparently, or most people's, that's a thing that they could make a show about, and that's the one clip for the trailer. So it must land in people's experience. And it tells me that you're not if you can't share all of yourself with somebody, then they're not the right person. So, and then the longer you wait to reveal things about yourself or to share your true feelings or to, whether it's sexually or emotionally or whether it's your fears or your, hopes or who's going to say I love you first. All that's fear about intimacy, really.
So you are
a lot of stuff.
You're accelerating growth and healing with applied structural neurophenomenology in an evolutionary framework, or maybe we could call this magic, which is also applicable to relationships, which are a key area where these anxieties are rooted in people. And I'm curious about the role that this plays in the broader culture, because I look around and I see a lot of information traps, right? People are trying to manipulate each other everywhere. Incoming information is trying to hack our brains. We're raising kids to be either indoctrinated or susceptible to indoctrination, one or the other. Right. And it's being, this is an ancient human problem being amplified by modern technology. Are these tools like NLP, like trance dynamics, like the things you're talking about, are they an interesting tool in the toolkit for people who want to develop themselves? Or are they like an absolute survival necessity now in the kind of information environment that we've produced?
The answer to both questions is yes. The unfortunate thing is in the wrong hands, they're also incredibly effective manipulation tools. That's the really sad part, which is why nobody was able to buy my NLP course on the web. I had to talk to them for at least an hour first, one-on-one, before I would allow them to register, because we want to be very cautious about who has access to tools of influence. As a result, the people in my trainings are always wonderful people who I sometimes become friends with later, or but whether it's the pickup artist community misusing these tools, I'll just say using these tools unethically, or politicians and their strategists using them. So the best thing about knowing these tools is you can then also guard yourself against the heavy manipulation, whether it's a television commercial that's triggering your emotions with a song, quite effectively, by the way. Commercials have gotten really good. One of my favorites, by the way, just to demonstrate it, but I think it's a good one. Lexus has a sports car out, and they rev the engine a few times, and then they rev the engine at the same time in all these contexts, like these two teenagers like on a couch studying, and then they like reach over and touch each other's hands, and or a guy jumping off a cliff with one of those X sports flying, like not a hang glider, but like they pop out the wings, and something that seems insane to me that I have no interest in doing. But and then a woman looking at a blank canvas, considering it, and then she runs a red stripe of paint across it, and when she runs the red stripe across it, the same revving of the engine. And at the end, they show the car, and then it's fantastic. Like, I just got chills describing it. Right? It's incredibly effective. It's happening to us all the time, though. In it's why I have unplugged from all media except for the aforementioned, football news analysis. But even then, I make sure they're calm analysis. They're not people arguing or whatever. Guys that grind film, which are hard to find, by the way. I quit watching Crossfire years ago too. Remember Crossfire 20 years ago or 30 years ago on CNN? Basically, people arguing across. Well, it started this style of like, no, you're stupid.
Crossfire is the entire culture now.
Dude, seriously, like for real. So the answer to your question is yes, all the above. But also, in terms of relationships and phenomenology, what's that big word you use? Phenomenology.
Yeah. Fun, big, sexy word.
5-syllable words. A woman last night, apparently on a dating profile, I don't remember creating, I wrote that I was a sapiosexual. And a woman, she goes, sapiosexual. And I go, yeah, translation, I only fuck smart women.
Well, I appreciate that you are.
So hold on. Let me get back on track.
All right.
Smart humans.
Swayed into abstract bestiality.
Well, I did not say smart animals. Wow. Although humans are animals, for those of you who aren't aware of that classification. Anyway, Jesus Christ. Or, some other holy Shiva, whatever. What other god or goddess can I take their name in vain? But one of the things I've done with the evolutionary relationship material isn't just applying these tools. That's important. But like, hey, there's 3 basic phases to a relationship typically. There's, a relationship genesis, like the beginning. And what agreements do you have to put in place so you don't have to worry about it later? What questions do you need to ask? Like, how do you actually do it right in the beginning, right? So if it's, just how to, like, in terms of dating, there's a whole precursor to that. That's, the evolutionary gentleman material I've been developing. But then there's this middle part, which I'm just calling a relationship continuum, which is like, how do you, and like from a really simple perspective, just always be courting her. And occasionally, if I post something like that, a woman goes, well, and you should always be courting him, like be courting each other. And that's, appreciation Just constantly, my last life partner, I mean, I've been single for 3 years and celibate for most of that time, but because I think that's the responsible thing to do, to make sure I learn, things from the previous phase, which will be a callback in a few minutes. How do you keep it alive? How do you keep it sexy? How do you work through conflict, efficiently and effectively? How do you, what's the structure for those conversations when they need to happen? And then a relationship postmortem, which is really about how do you grieve responsibly? How do you make sure you're being responsible with other, for me, it's incredibly irresponsible to date before you're ready to date. And you should actually feel the pain of the breakup, because in the pain, if you're taking responsibility, which is where this conversation started, you will access the things that you could do differently in the future so you can avoid making the same mistakes. How many people are like, I keep dating the same person, the same problem person? All right, well, you apparently fucked up after your last breakup. You should have taken 6 months or a year and done a deep inventory around what's important to you in relationships and important to you in a partner, what's no longer acceptable to you, what you loved about that person, but you want in addition in the future. These things are very important inquiries so that you can have a deeper, more connected, more fulfilling relationship in the future. And that's relationship post-mortem, even though it begins this cycle again. So, another thing about NLP isn't that it's just, and I'm not trying to do an ad for NLP, I'm more of an integral theory guy, but NLP gives you the eyes to study structure. And so, I've modeled out structure of what's effective and what's not effective so that I can relax and be a romantic. Like, it really isn't like people are like, this is very masculine. I'm like, no, I'm a fucking gushy hearted, poetic, I used to have a rose budget for my last life partner. And I didn't call it she got at least 2 dozen roses, together. Cause one dozen it just doesn't, when you look at 1 dozen, it's just not satisfying. And I would arrange them myself, cause they don't know how to arrange them. Let's face it. I have to, arrange them in a beautiful cascade. Just some butcher paper and a ribbon around it. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of avoidable mistakes that people make in a relationship that have them be guarded. But I think one of the things to do is to look at our blocks to intimacy and connection. We all want to feel loved, understood, connected. Everybody wants that, and I think that as we evolve, if we just look at pre-rational, rational, and trans-rational for your entry-level integral theory people, then we those stages can also map across to the 3 phases. And my work always has 3 phases, and it maps across to those stages of ego development. But if we're constantly, if we don't clear out the stuff in the basement, yeah.
Well, I appreciate this, call to be cleaned out in advance of relationships, and this, the ABC principle, always be courting, sounds great. Appreciate that you're vetting the people that you're sharing these technologies with, because, we've got 2 girls in the house, and it's an odd thing to think you have to sit down with them and have a conversation about, look, you're meeting people who are literally wearing oxytocin they've purchased and watched YouTube videos about how to try to hack your subconscious linguistically or things like that. Like, it's an odd situation where the world is, where the technology is psychologically and physically. Yeah, well, they put it in a lot of aftershaves and things like that now.
Are you kidding me? Well, I don't wear any aftershave.
So there's a world of, for lack of a better word, sorcery going on that we have to be aware of in order just to show up with any kind of sovereignty. Yeah. And you were talking about relationship postmortems. I'm curious about, you mentioned the early questions, like what's the pre-mortem? Like, what kinds of things should somebody be asking of themselves and of the other person in order to figure out, is this a person I can safely get into trances with? And is this a person I can, safely avoid getting hacked by?
Right. Well, I'm going to start with not with a question, but with a standard. I'm not physically intimate with well, I might ask for a kiss, but I don't have sex with anybody before a third date, and a third date would be the absolute earliest. And you get to see a lot of stuff in between. First of all, you get to see how they react to that. Whether it's disbelief, I've had one be like, "Oh, sure." I'm like, "No, really." They're like, "Oh, okay. Sorry, there's things we need to talk about." But I'm I'm going to use online dating for a minute because it's, I think it's a subculture. And first of all, I want to say that you can have anything you want out there. And, if a woman or a man is looking for a hookup and you're clear about that, hookup being, I guess, the current vernacular for a technology-based one-night stand, you meet that day, and then I'm not into that. I burned through that in my mid-20s, 25 years ago, before dating apps. But there's a few, I think, tips. One is to you want to chit chat for a little bit, but you want to move. I like to move quickly to a short video call, and I just say to get a sense of each other. First of all, you're just making sure they are who they say they are. It's pretty straightforward. And then meet in person, but be upfront about your intentions. But what I like to ask in that video call is, what's important to you in a relationship? What's important to you in a partner? What's important? And then when they say, well, like if they say something like communication, well, great. How would that show up for you? So I have an actual grounded sense of what's important to them, what they're looking for. And we save a lot of time. And unfortunately, people are just sometimes going on just attraction or chemistry. So it's critical. I'm not saying like I want to feel insatiable for the woman I'm with. But not everybody is that way. I would rather be single and self-pleasure, is that the appropriate term, than have unfulfilling, unconnected sex, which a lot of people are fine with, which is fine. If that's, in fact, it would be cool if instead of hookup, they said, I'd like to have some unconnected subject object sex. It'd be like, all right, people could opt in for that. Not what I want, but so if somebody is, that those questions, what's important to you in a partner, or what's important to you in a relationship, or, and sometimes just starting off with what are you looking for on this app? Because sometimes they don't say, and, they tell me. As a small tip to guys, by the way, sometimes a woman says she's just looking for friendship. That's because she's had too many creeps come at her. She says she's like, and I'll just ask them, hey, you said you're looking for friendship. Is that real, or is that to keep the creeps away? And they almost always say it's to keep the creeps away, because women are inundated on date. Like they can just put a photo up with nothing in the profile, and apparently they have a deluge. I won't respond to profiles without a text and some explanation of what they're about. So that's that's that. And I think having so those are the questions you ask. What are the questions to ask? What's important to you in a relationship? You can also ask, like, you don't want the person to feel interviewed, so you have to sort of like weave it in, or you can pre-frame it, which is an NLP term, by simply, or safe porting, some people use, but setting a context like, hey, I'm going to ask some pretty deep questions. Is that okay with you? Because does it actually tell us anything if they have a degree or not, or where they grew up, or if they have siblings? Does that actually inform us about them for really? No, not really. I mean, sometimes it's useful trivia. If it's important to them, sure, but it's not really important. It's usually some higher level order thing going on.
That seems really important, like a sense of, or a capacity to make a distinction between what information might tell you something and what information is essentially trivia.
Yeah. Well, I'm a high school dropout, and I've had plenty of women, say they would only date somebody with an advanced degree. And we meet and they're like, oh, you're one of the smartest people I've ever met. And I go, yeah, I'm a high school dropout. I went to prison instead. They go, where did you go to college? I went, I didn't. I went to prison instead. They're like, what? Are you messing? No, I'm serious. And then, I tell them. Actually, I don't mess around anymore. I just sometimes I'll send them I have an audio clip of my life path, which only half of which, I actually told you here for lots of reasons. But I always send it to clients or students in advance of them, having a exploratory session call or so they understand that I'm not just some guy who, like, this is my life purpose, not some, I'm not a marketing idea. Like, this is what gives my life meaning, period. And I realized that around 2002, like, there wasn't anything else for me to do in the world other than to be in service of others, accelerating their evolution and having more of the lives that they wanted. But and anything else really hurt. Like, once you know your life purpose, everything else aches. Like, there's a soul level ache if you're not doing it. But I
did
just
you
send these.
figure out that this was your life purpose?
Well, I tried to get a sales job after I left my wife. I think I lasted 2 weeks before, they very gently fired me. Yeah, it's just bad timing, they said, but there's a soul level ache, right, that happens if you know your life. And I did know my life purpose was to assist in accelerating the evolution of consciousness on the planet. And then, after I left my wife, I tried to go get a sales job in IT or in tech. And I had lots of experience in the business. I had at one point, a few years before, I was billing $14,000 an hour for the company I was working for, placing IT consultants for them. And I was in direct placement for staffing. I wasn't a recruiter. I was a direct sales side. So I was really good at it, and a lot of and in fact, some of the same principles apply. Like, I didn't waste anybody's time. I didn't even tell them who I was. I would just find out who the director of engineering was, and then I would use their first name. I call him, say, is Steven. May I ask who's calling? You can just tell him Jason's calling. Well, what's this regarding? You can just tell him Jason's calling. By the way, that's how you get past a gatekeeper, for anybody listening who does cold calls. That's how you always use first names, and you say you can just tell them Jason's calling because they are empowered but not qualified to make a decision. But then when I got the guy, Steve, let's say, I'd say, this is a sales call. Do you have 20 minutes? And I'd ask him about his projects, and never told him who I was, didn't tell him who I worked for, just asked him about himself. Kind of like a first date. Just ask her about herself or himself or their selves, whatever your preference is. I don't care. It's all the same thing. It's all communication. And it's all inquiry. And sometimes at the end they go, wait, who are you? I go, it doesn't matter. I'm going to find you this person. And they're like, all right, you're right. It doesn't matter. I'm like, great. I'll call you back in an hour. I'm like, they don't care who I am. They care about the experience they're having. And that's kind of true. But I think one of the biggest mistakes people make on a date, especially guys, is to try to rattle off your CV. Even if she asks, I say, sometimes I'll say, thank you for asking that, but enough about me. Without answering, let's talk about you for a while. What's important to you? And I'm not trying to be evasive, I'm not. But anyway.
So you're in a field, and there are other people in this field who provide individual and relationship counseling and do NLP type things. And other than your integrity and life experience and temperament, what you're bringing to this that's a little bit different is partly this notion of developmental stages. Yeah. And that's a controversial topic because it's hard to tell sometimes when stages are empowering in terms of clarifying where someone's at and where they might be marginalizing in terms of categorizing someone. Yeah. Are you concerned at all about the potential of developmental levels to be misused? As if we were ranking intellect on a biased scale or putting everyone to work in levels of a big factory hierarchy or something like that. Is it a real risk, or is it just that any idea can be exploited by lower levels of complexity and ethics?
Well, so that's the last thing you said is the most challenging. And it's the thing I've seen happen in the integral community that breaks my heart. Like you see people at lower or not, or let's say pre-integral, to use the most recent diplomatic term from Corey, and most accurate from Corey DeVos. I really like this idea of being pre-integral, right? So the people use frameworks from their stage of development. And here's the thing, stages are in motion. It should never be used as a typing system. And people use it like a typing system, like, oh, so you're a this. It's not Myers-Briggs. And in fact, I've had people move through stages and their Myers-Briggs type changes, by the way. But, and I think that's a good thing. Even I began as an INTJ, and recently I think I've tested as an INFP. I keep checking it because, us INTJs were very, very arrogant about our typing. But I was like, all right, cool. Like I'm feeling more, slightly less judgmental, more discerning still. But the biggest misuse of stages is that they use it as a typing system. And then they use it, and I did this in my 20s, 25 years ago. They use it to invalidate the person's perspectives. First of all, that is definitely not an integral way of going about it. You need to make sure you're informed about where they're going to be coming from, and use a skillful means to communicate with them in hopes that, you can also at some point, some people would disagree with me on this. Some people would say this is a very unintegral approach, but you're supposed to just be a spiral wizard and but I think it's helpful for us to show people the perspectives they're missing and the limitations of their perspective so that they can expand and ascend or deepen. And that's the first thing I'll start with is, higher as a metaphor. We could also use deeper. So if we think about concentric circles, we could, or a wider embrace, or further along in our development rather than higher. It's like, well, further along in our development. But it is developmental, and there's it's not a fixed thing. And in fact, it's just a probability. It's a weather report. It's like 60% of the time I come from, a certain stage, and 20% of the time if I'm having a bad day, I come from, it's a weather report. It's not fixed at all. So, people who think it's about ranking are, first of all, they're missing the point, and they're pre-integral. But second of all, they are, like, where it's accurate is it is a assessment of somebody's capacity for how much of the world they can hold. So, we have to be cautious about falling into the pre-integral, the immediate green and spiral dynamics language, the immediately pre-integral trap of saying, cool, it's really great that people are terrorists, they're just not understood. And it's like, no, it's not okay. We need to stop that behavior. Violence should never be an answer to it. So, there is a risk in honoring all perspectives, but you also have to honor them and then speak to what degree. Like everybody's right, but not to the same degree, right? So there's that. But we're not talking about ranking. We're talking about degrees of depth. But we all have the ability to, like, there's no, it's not fixed at all. And if we engage in the endeavor of deepening ourselves, and I kind of prefer the depth because, it's more of height is more of a visual or cognitive thing, depth that resonates deeper, but that's just some of my preferences. But I think it's true, or a wider embrace. These are things that we should all be engaged in. And again, I want to circle back to something I said early on. It's not about agreeing with them. It's about understanding and connecting. And nobody ever evolved because they were told they were wrong.
I'm thinking of an episode of the TV show House MD. in which a physics prodigy medicates himself so that he's not so smart and he can be happier and enjoy his marriage with this very nice, attractive, emotionally available woman who simply can't see the things that he sees. That's a provocative scenario. And if it's true that people grow in terms of their depth or height or richness, their ability to inspect and feel about the world, this is a strange thing in relationships. What do you say to somebody who can recognize what their partner is talking about, but whose own emotional pattern making can't be reciprocally perceived by that other person? And how do we distinguish situations where there's a real disparity in insight from situations in which your partner is maybe equally as deep, but does it in a different style or in different areas?
Yeah. That last part is intriguing. Let me address the first part. I think if there's a serious developmental gap, you shouldn't be with them, period. And I could say that about a lot of contexts. And sometimes developmental capacities are complementary. My last life partner, she was trained as a diplomat and went to finishing school, and so there were things where I was like, that fucking matters to people, and she'd be like, yes. And here's I'd be like, great. We have complementary, capacities. Like it was, or at least that's how I viewed it. She didn't, which, spoke to our developmental. Like I kept trying to have the conversation with her that it's complementary. Like there's certain things I'm skilled in, developed in, certain things she is. And we actually, I thought, made a perfect fit. Her inability to see that actually caused, one of the, I have to be cautious here. Frustrations for me, and that I just couldn't, I didn't have the skill or capacity to navigate. But so there's that. But also, if there's a significant developmental gap, it's just not going to be a fit. And I can't remember his name. You probably are aware of his name. I think his last name starts with a U. There's a guy who wrote a book with a matrix, an integral matrix on what the different stages of development and their partnership and what it would look like. And do you know what I'm talking about?
Not exactly.
Okay.
I need a little more information. Go ahead with what you feel like it means.
So a friend of mine and I used to call it evolutionary fit. This was 20 years ago when we were banding about, the integral theory concept. Like there needs to be integral evolutionary fit. Like you have to be a close enough stage of development for it to actually work. And, at lower stages or I just realized the opposite of deep is shallow. At shallower stage, right? Not such a great metaphor now. At less deep stages.
You mean Martin Uchik?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that dude has some great work around this, which I don't feel confident to. But I was like, I looked at his matrix and I went, oh, yes, thank you. This, I've been trying to put language to this. Didn't really, and he lays it out really clearly, and he even lays out what kind of relationship it'll be. Which, not to, I should be promoting myself here, but I also have access to all those ways of thinking, and then some. Anyway, he's done some great work, but evolutionary fitting is really critical, but we also need to appreciate different capacities. One of the things about that life partner I talked to you about, I was like, this is great. She actually has developed in this area. I want to learn from her, right? But also there's certain things I don't want to have to, the very rudimentary way I would language it 15 years ago is I don't want a woman who I feel like should be my client. I don't want somebody with self-esteem issues sadly, a lot of advice I see guys give other guys, which is hilarious, by the way. It's kind of like a woman giving advice on how to give a blowjob. It's like, it always sort of strikes me as odd. Shouldn't you ask the guy? It's like a guy telling other guys how to eat pussy. You're like, Maybe ask a woman about her. Maybe, who's the audience that you're trying to reach? But a lot of the advice I see guys give other guys is just, I'm like, are you kidding me? Like this is, it's a circle jerk. I realized I went down a very, anyway, back on street level, not in the gutter.
Did you just reference 3 distinct sexual acts in the last 30 seconds? Please.
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Yes. Your Honor, please.
Yes, I did. Well,
that's right. You've been called before the Senate hearings to testify on this.
Oh my gosh, the Washington football team is. I knew this was going to happen. They mishandled, and then, so the Washington football team. I'm going to personally indulge for a moment. They had incredible workplace misconduct, sexual harassment, right? So much so that the owner was fined $10 million, which is nothing for a billionaire, and also he's away from the team for a year while his wife is handling day-to-day. So yeah, he's got no influence there. But here's the really extraordinary part. They had over 100 complaints from employees, and John Gruden got fired as a result. Everything John Gruden did is despicable and I don't support. But why did John Gruden get fired for a thing that happened when he wasn't even an employee of the NFL? He worked for ESPN at the time. And Bruce Allen, who was also no longer working for and the NFL goes, yeah, there's 650,000 emails, but those were the only points of misconduct in it. And we're like, nobody's believing it. And this is what happens when you don't self-regulate ethically enough. Yeah. People are like, oh, it's overreach by Congress. Is it though? What are you doing? And the mistake that the NFL made, other than, 32 billionaires who are used to doing whatever they want, is, what a great problem to have. But, also a little tone deaf. They should have been more transparent. They made the extraordinary move of having the attorney, the special counsel they hired to investigate the Washington football team, not make a written report and only give an oral report to the commissioner, which tells you there's a whole lot of shit going on that they didn't want anybody to know about. They didn't want a record of it. And so Congress we'd like to know a few things.
This is right in your wheelhouse, eh? Sexuality, relationships, integrity violations, human stupidity, and football.
Oh my! It's all my wheelhouses, actually. I was like, and part of what the reason that I brought it up is you're like, did you just do that? And I was like, yes, I did. That's how you handle that shit. You go, yeah, you gotta be honest and transparent. And the number one principle I have everybody has expectations in relationship. I'm going to land this plane, believe it or not. Everybody has expectations in relationship. We all have rules we're operating by. Some people call them shoulds. Some people call them, right? And I don't like to hold anybody accountable to rules they haven't agreed to. You should have known. No, we grew up in different towns. In fact, I've known people who went to the same church, believe in the same religion, grew up in the same small town, and they have different, you should know about marriage. It's no, man, we live in a global economy, global ideas, global marketplace, global exchange, H-1B visas, to give a shout out to the staffing industry. You can't make any assumptions. Assumptions, shoulds, expectations. So we have to make these things explicit. The advice I gave, 30 or 40 minutes ago about making sure that we ask, what's important to you, it's so that you can't make any assumptions, but it's revealing, if it's a fit right away or not. But I have 4 basic rules, and I'd like to end with this. One is truth over comfort. You have to tell the truth and hear the truth. And that's your foundational agreement for any healthy relating. If you don't have that, if you don't feel safe to tell the truth, by the way, the worst move you can make is to be triggered when someone's like, I'm really scared to tell you this, but, and you go, oh my God, I can't believe you did that. Yeah, well, guess what? They're going to lie to you in the future. So you have to thank them for their courage. This is where having your triggers cleared out, you could be like, "Ooh, that's intense. Thank you for that. Must have been really scary for you to say to me right now. I love that you did it. I love your honesty. And you can say, I need some, time to process it, but like, I'm really glad. Like, you have to encourage truth telling, and you also have to like, it could be over their comfort or over your own comfort. So like, I might be scared to say anything. I just say, I'm really scared to tell you this, and here's this thing. It could also be you're like, well, I don't want to hurt their feelings. No, fucking hurt their feelings. You know how many guys complain about women just ghosting them? It's like, just say you're not interested. Now, a lot of women say, I don't say that because the guys get triggered and they attack me. I'm like, all right. So both of you, stop doing that. Quit doing that. Don't do that. But, I have these conversations on a second date. I'm like, all right, there's 4 agreements for healthy relating. One is truth over comfort. I lay it out. I say what it means. And then here's the critical part. I go, do you agree to that? Because sometimes they go, oh, it's great. I go, okay, cool. But do we have an accord? As they would say in Pirates of the Caribbean, right? But do we have an accord? Yes, we have an accord. And the second one is we don't hold each other accountable to agreements we haven't made. I already talked about that one. The third, if we're upset or triggered, we make a request. So, and we have to acknowledge whether or not, it was an expectation or an agreement was violated or a boundary was, that we're just discovering, oh, I noticed this is important to me. And there are ways to communicate that effectively. And sometimes you just need time. But, I have a request in the future. Like, let's say somebody's, 15 minutes late to a thing. But they don't communicate with you in advance. And you go, well, my request is in the future, rather than going, you should have communicated. Everybody knows. Well, I've met people who think if you're going to be 20 minutes late, that's okay. But like 21 is not. I've met people who think if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late. Like I met, there's like a 30-minute range there. Well, 26 minutes, but so, we don't hold each other accountable to agreements we have made. So sometimes you have to make a request. Now, for a request, there's 4 possible answers. Yes, no. I guess I agree to your request, which means there's now a new rule or new agreement. No, which, like, no, I'm not doing that. And I have other people say yes way too often. Like you need to honor the agreement you made. And sometimes you can say, I'm going to say no because I'm scared I can't keep that agreement. And I want to make sure I have integrity to our agreements. The third one is I need more information. Like, I'm not sure. Could you, and you asked for, what does this mean? How will it apply? The fourth possible response is I need time to consider it. I recommend if somebody says that, you say, how much time? Because people don't have the conversations that need to happen. They're terrified. They get scared. So those are, those are, I think, the 4 foundational agreements for healthy relating. Truth over comfort. Don't hold anyone accountable to agreements they haven't made. If you're upset, make a request for a new agreement. And, the fourth one is we're responsible for our own experience. Now, if you have NLP training or NLP experience, you know that you create your own emotions, or you just have the mindset of I'm like, my triggers are my triggers, let's say. But that also means taking care of yourself. So if you don't have that kind of facility, part of being responsible for your own experience is saying like, hey, I'm really tender in this area. Would you, give me some grace here? And make a request. And if they say no, they're psychopathic assholes, and fuck that. All right, I think that's the whole.
That's really nice. I like these. The agreements, I mean, they require this, like you're saying, a natural but also impressive capacity for hearing and saying things. And that requires us to be pretty clear inside, because a lot of the things we need to hear and say are difficult or dense or tender in terms of the waves of sensation and emotion we have to go through. And the ability to take that as a positive is really interesting to me. One of the things I think you and I have in common is a tendency to demonstrate decontraction in the rain. And people are habituated to huddle and hunch and to run and hide from raindrops. And it feels good to not do that. And it feels good to show other people that you can not do that there's no enemy here. You can be open and joyous and inflated. And I wonder what you think about people making that shift to being decontracted and how they have to go through something like affirmatively embracing an uncomfortable sensation. Because a lot of these things you're talking about seem to be, you got to change your attitude about an uncomfortable wave of feeling. You have to say, oh, that's a good thing. I can feel that. I can speak to that. I can feel into and past that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to just, language it positively. Because, it took me a second to even know a decontraction from that. So embrace the rain. We embrace the rain.
Embrace the rain.
And with that, and sometimes what that looks like is like, and funny enough, this morning, I discovered a new word. Pluviophile.
A rain lover.
Yeah. Yeah. It's someone who, and I actually have it on my screen. That's what I was doing when you were. It's a lover of rain, someone who finds joy and peace of mind during rainy days. Now, it may not be natural. In fact, I can't tell you how many people were like, so you're moving to Seattle. You know about the weather, right? I was like, yeah, I'm good. I'm fucking, yes, I do. And they're like, well, and they're projecting their, I talked about projecting and trying to force values on other people. People project. In fact, until you get to a certain stage of development, or further on, projection, like your perception is often projection. Until you have enough knowledge of different perspectives, you can either accurately project because you've seen enough of it, which is why I fired my very young primary care provider recently. He just hasn't seen enough shit. But it's not natural typically. Like we huddle in the rain naturally. So I took it on as a practice when I was living in San Francisco. If it rained downtown, because I saw these people huddling, I would intentionally, part of it was to my own practice, part of it was to offer people a different way. I would do this on the street corner. Like if it was raining, and I didn't, and I think everybody can guess I do care about my hair, but I don't care that much. I was on a bus going, it was a random downpour in Seattle here about a week ago. And now it's known that in Seattle, you can't use an umbrella because they'll know you're an outsider. But I was in shorts and a t-shirt, which is apparently going way too far for even Seattleites, right? So just that willingness to lean into the uncomfortable, that's where your growth edge is. I saw a quote recently that very succinctly summed up something that I agree with wholeheartedly, but didn't have this succinct language for it. We find comfort in those we agree with, but we have growth in people we disagree with. And that is, that's the game right there. That is personal evolution right there. If you can embrace, going right back to the thing I mentioned at the very beginning of this call with cities. If you can, sure, it's comfortable to talk to people you agree with, but you get more development from people you don't agree with if you have enough facility to consider their perspective first and then just, see what's missing.
This is where I should say, I don't know if I agree with you about that.
I think you're absolutely right. Would you say more about that?
I grew up in the islands of British Columbia, so I'm one of those people who's inherently suspicious of umbrellas. And when I was a kid, I remember I was, for some reason, reading a lot about Mesoamerican mythology early on. And my mother asked me if I thought there was a god. And I said, I don't know if there's a god, but I'm pretty sure there's a rain god. because I always sort of felt like there is the manna from heaven aspect of rain. And I don't know if that was just a snotty way of me being able to show off in the rain relative to people who seem hunched over. Total sidetrack. Earlier, you were talking about books that changed your life and how there's a bunch of them. And I'm curious about human beings who you think are admirable. Like, who are your heroes, or who do you think's actually lived a pretty successful human life in terms of what you think people should be doing?
I don't have any heroes.
No heroes?
Nope.
Do you look around, or do you look through history and you go, "Oh, that person lived a pretty good life"? If I had a kid, I'd say, "Hey, that's a good example of a person."
No.
No.
And I hope to not ever be anybody's hero or their guru. And I think, first of all, if we put people on pedestals, they're gonna fall down. And I mean, my gosh, the stuff that's come out about the integral community at the highest levels about emotional abuse and sexual misconduct is, horrifying. It's like, you were supposed to be better. That's like every time I have whether it's Genpo Roshi or it's I forget her name, but she's a corporate trainer and a Zen Buddhist monk. But she's apparently horrible to people. And even though the first time I got exposed to her, I was watching a YouTube video of, Wilbur saying, what do people need? And she said communication training, or like interpersonal, that like basically you need to be better with people. And apparently she's a total tyrant behind the scenes. And so, no, they're like, and if you think you have a hero or you think you have a guru, they're human beings. They're fallible. I'm fallible. I have good days, I have bad days. I mean, there are things that I'll never be, like sexual misconduct thing is so simple. Don't fuck students. I don't know I don't know why that's so difficult for people. And I don't even know, like, when I see somebody look at me with glazed over eyes, and I can see her when she's got, that's 100% somebody I don't want to have sex with, because she's when their eyes defocus and they glaze over. Now, sometimes they're defocusing because they're imagining certain things with you, which I won't name because I already did 3 already. But you don't want some doughy-eyed, glassy-eyed woman who holds you as some delusion, like in her delusion that you're perfect or a god, or you don't want that. You want somebody who's going to see you and accept you for all the things that you can bring, all your faults, all your, struggles, your emotional ups and downs, your brilliance, all of it, the full range of it. So no, I don't have any heroes. I have,
isn't there something hot about delusional, submissive craziness?
Well, maybe in a BDSM scene, but not in a relationship.
Yeah. Do you think, because we've been talking about evolutionary relationships, and for the most part, we've been talking about sort of, peer-to-peer emotional, sexual human couplings, but this thing with gurus or adepts or elders, do you think that's, is that a viable form of evolutionary relationship? Are there healthy ways to do it, or is it an inherently problematic form?
I don't. So mentors and gurus are different. If you feel like you have love, so I remember Cosmic Consciousness is a wonderful set of CDs with Ken Wilber being interviewed by the founder of Sounds True, and I can't remember her name, but I love her
Tammy
voice. Yeah, Tammy, thank you. And his loss, right? And Cosmic Consciousness, I've listened over and over, like maybe 50 times. And he says, a psychotherapist you should absolutely not be in love with. A guru you should fall in love with, but you're going to be something like I don't remember what he says after that, but like you're going to be heartbroken. I don't know, man. I mean, maybe so Prince, who I adored and think is probably the greatest musical genius of our age, I didn't actually want to meet him. Even if I was allowed backstage, I'd be like, I don't have I don't have the, what do they call it? Starstruck. I don't get starstruck. I think it's a version of that. I think the adoration of celebrities in our culture is a very dangerous thing. I don't think that certain gurus are very different than that. But here's like, they are human. There's now, hopefully they've moved through things that you want to move through. And so if you can learn from them, like, here, I moved through this thing, here's how I did it. Great. You know, a guide, somebody with greater skill. But you got to be very cautious. I think, you know, like self-scout thyself around. Like, if you feel love and adoration towards somebody, you're only seeing a certain aspect of them. And, you know, one of the first things I try to do if I see that in a student is deconstruct it. Now, I would probably be world famous already if I wanted to be, if I didn't also have that thing where I will, like, if a student looks like that, and I, in fact, in 2014, I looked at a room, it was only 20 people, but I looked at them and I said, if I ever see you gurify me with that glazy eyed look in your eyes, I'm going to kick you out of the course. I told them that. I'm a human with human, like, you know, feet of clay, whatever metaphor you want to use, right? So see them for what they are, but don't assume that you're, and you know what? Nobody's going to understand this. They're going to be like, but my guru is, I love him so much. He's amazing. His heart. That's fine. Fucking whatever. I don't care. This is not the note I wanted to end up this thing on. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, the stuff that's coming out about the emotional abuse, the integral community at the highest levels now, it's like, come on, man. Like, what happened to the, and so it's this hyper intellectualized, and, you know, the essence of personal evolution, which seems to have been lost. It's not like cognitive development is necessary, but insufficient for moral and emotional development. You have to be smart enough to take on the different perspectives, right? But it's like the barometer, like spiral dynamics, for instance, isn't do you get the model intellectually? It's where are you reacting from emotionally?
Yeah.
And people become tyrants. I mean, the guy that's, I'm not, and I don't want to name them all, but the guy that started What is Enlightenment magazine, he's apparently a complete asshole to everybody behind the scenes. It's like, you shouldn't, like, it's not, you know, you're, it shows me that they're actually not as emotionally developed as they should be as leaders. And we should, like, first of all, I don't know how it happens. And I think gurification has a large part to do with that. They're idolized, they're elevated, they're, you know, I remember the guy who, actually, I'll just say this, Travis Decker, who used to own half of Integral Boulder. I met him in 2003, I think. And Mark Lewis and I, mostly Mark Lewis, but, you know, I like Mark Lewis introduced him to integral theory. And then I had just left my wife. And I remember Decker and his girlfriend at the time, Starbuck, who's a lovely woman, like I was sitting on the poof chair and they like immediately kneeled in front of me to like ask me questions about integral theory. And I was like, what are you doing? Like, you know, I don't need you. And they were like downcast, like they were used to with gurus, apparently, because they had both been to India. I was like, yeah, I don't know what you're doing. It feels really weird right now, though. Like I'm a guy that has information or more, you know, like I'm just a guy living on this planet, doing, you know, assisting in evolving consciousness, but I'm not, for God's sakes, don't elevate me. I mean, I hope that people respect me because of my competence and my skills and my insight, but I'm not a god or a guru or a, well, we're all gods and goddesses. That's the thing. But I think it's a problem. I think it's a real problem. And it leads to, and I immediately, anybody who engages in sexual misconduct with their students, which could be just fucking your student consensually, by the way, I think, I don't have any respect for them anymore. They're going to look at you with loving adoration And you need to have a deep enough perception of what's happening in that dynamic to have compassion for them and to keep your cock in your pants. Like, what the fuck? Right? Don't fuck students. Totally not the note I wanted to end on, but
we are
like, really, Jesus Christ, man. It's so simple.
I love the robust moral clarity there. And I think we're getting pretty close to the end of this discussion.
Or clients, to be clear, just,
yes,
or clients.
First of all, I want to say that I'm definitely going to start using the word glazy ass. Second of all, I got maybe one or two final questions about you. And
I have 4 minutes.
You teach professional and personal trainings. Right. And I imagine you asking people to be a little bit more professional in their personal lives and maybe a little more personal in parts of their professional lives. And I'm curious about your balance of those things, because
it's a good noticing.
When I look at you and I listen to you, I see you intentionally putting effort into showing up professionally, but I also see you exposing a lot more vulnerable personal energy than a lot of people do. And I'm curious about whether those dimensions sit comfortably inside you, or whether it's, an oiled cobra and a mongoose in a sack that you're always trying to wrangle together somehow. What are those dimensions like within you?
Well, 30 years of intentional personal development gets you a few things. One of them is, a level of comfort with myself, but also a clarity around, I'm here to serve. So, there's a lot of me most of me is unscripted. In fact, I think you're the only person I've ever done something like this with, where we never really, you told me a couple of things you want to talk about, but I don't, we don't even have bullet points, just to be transparent. I think the age of authenticity has arrived. And I think the more we're authentic with people, the more they feel comfortable with themselves to be themselves. But it always has to come back to, what serves right now. Like, I'm here as an instrument of service, which is why I've almost never had, I've had over 500 clients since 2004 through 6-month one-on-one programs. I can count the conflicts I've had, or they're not even conflicts, moments of tension on one hand, because it's not about me, it's about their outcomes. And then here's what will help get them their outcomes. So, I think to me, that's the thing. But also, I don't know if I can be any other way other than just authentic.
Clients, service, outcome.
I want everyone to be free. So if I'm not free myself, I need to be, on track, but free.
Right.
But there's no mongoose or snake.
Okay.
There's sometimes oil. Did you say oil?
I did say oil, yeah, because I found these. I was imagining the mongoose and the snake kind of slipping around in there.
Is that a metaphor?
Clients come to you provide service to these clients. There's outcomes of this service.
Yeah.
What to you is a signal that it's worked? What's the most rewarding thing for you to hear from someone who's been through counseling or training or working with you? What do you want them to say to you at the end?
I don't care. Actually, I want them to tell me the truth at the end. Well, I want them to have their outcomes. So 2/3 of the way through, because I do very detailed information gathering. Somebody is going to work with me. There's a 30-minute initial conversation, and there's a 2.5-hour, also complimentary exploratory session. So we look back on their outcomes for metrics, and we examine those 2/3 of the way through. I have a couple of questions in my exit survey, though, which are intentionally designed to extract the truth, I like to say. And, I stay with them while it's a Google form now, but, in fact, let's see, the flavor of one of the questions is if you're at a party and a dear close friend of yours said that they wanted to work with Jason McClain one-on-one, what would you say about him that was not complimentary? And, what are your concerns? And they have to, it's a required question for the survey. There's also, what would you say about them that's complimentary, but like, what would you say about them that's critical? That's, and so for me, the most important thing is that they can tell me the truth so I can develop and evolve more for the next client, but also that they got their outcomes. And I can count on also on one hand, different people, by the way, I can also count on one, I should use this hand, conflict, this hand, your attention, this hand, people who didn't get their outcomes. I can count them on one hand, and none of them are because what I do doesn't work. There were other things at play, which I won't get into, but I even had one client, and I think there's only 3 or 4, but I even had one client who I told her going in, I'm not sure I can help you with your outcomes, but I have some ideas. Let's give it a shot. And it was something that was, she was experiencing that was not medically explained. And we were ineffective. She still referred people to me, and I ended up, ending it sooner and refunding some of her money back. And, but ultimately it's that they got their outcomes and then some, usually it's and then some. And because I have to go, evolutionarycompanies.com.
That's right. This has been a paid advertisement for Jason McClain Incorporated. No, this has been great, Jason. Thanks very much for sharing your insights and your time with us. I've really enjoyed this.
My pleasure.